Hi, I'm John Stange, and welcome to the Christian Podcasting Essentials course. In this course, we're going to learn how to create, grow, and monetize your faith-based podcast in 28 days or less. I don't know if you've been intimidated by the thought of building a new podcast, and I'm not certain if this is something that might be new for you, but I'm going to walk you through this. I'm going to show you exactly how it's done and how to do it right, from creation to growing an audience to monetizing the podcast in an ethical way so that you continue to have the opportunity to do what God's called you to do in this particular field. Now, let me tell you about what I'm currently seeing. At present, I host 3 podcasts, and they've grown rather popular over the past few years. The most popular is the Chapter a Day audio Bible, and I'll show you the specific tiles that I use for each of these podcasts in just a second. But the Chapter a Day audio Bible is the most popular of the 3. That, at this point, at the time I'm recording this right now, has had 3.5 million downloads, and I've been blown away at how it's listened to regularly. There are people that tell me they listen to it every day, and I hear from people all throughout the world at this point who listen to that podcast. Soon after that, I created the sermons and training and Bible study podcast that I also host. And of my 3 podcasts, that's actually the one that gets the least amount of downloads, but it's still doing pretty well. And earlier this year, I began my daily devotions with Pastor John podcast. And that one is on track to be close to the popularity of the Chapter a Day audio Bible. So I've been very blessed to see how these podcasts have been growing and how the Lord's been using them to bless a variety of people living throughout the world. And so I'm seeing millions of downloads now, and that continues to grow, and the rate at which it's growing is exponentially faster as time goes on. So that's been very interesting to observe as well. But one of the things that excites me about this is the fact that the Lord's turned this into a ministry that's reaching more people than I could have ever imagined being able to reach. For more than 22 years, actually, this is year 23, I've been in full-time pastoral ministry. And so in the context of our local church, I've had the opportunity to minister to people. I'm also involved in several related ministries. But online, particularly through podcasting, I'm discovering that this is a ministry that is really just allowing me to connect with more and more people living in places that I'll probably never have the privilege to visit. And I'm just grateful to have this opportunity. I consider it a vital part of the ministry that the Lord's entrusted to me. Since starting the podcasts, I also started a blog at desirejesus.com. It's possible that you're already familiar with that, but that's been gaining in popularity as well. And I think what's happening is the podcast is introducing people to the blog, and then the blog is getting indexed in some search engines. And as a result, then the blog is now leading people to the podcasts. And so they kind of seem to be feeding one another as far as how the Lord's using them to connect with more people. But it's definitely a good cousin to the podcasts. And so the blog and the podcast definitely work together. But one of the amazing things that's come out of this, and I'm sharing these things, by the way, with you at the outset because I hope this will encourage you if you're on the fence about whether or not podcasting is for you. But one of the things that I've just been really amazed by over the course of this past year, as the podcast has grown and as the blog has been growing, I was offered a book deal with a major publisher. Penguin Random House has a Christian imprint, Waterbrook, Multnomah, and they offered me a book deal this past year. I've also been involved in writing books for a variety for quite a few years now, and I was amazed that Penguin Random House offered me a book deal, and one of the things that they were particularly interested in was the fact that my podcasts and my blog have been connecting with more and more people, and they thought that there was a good opportunity for us to partner together and invited me to do so, and I accepted their offer. So I'll be working with them, I guess, for at least the foreseeable future, and I'm really grateful for that. But the genesis of this, the real origin of much of this, came back to the podcasts and how the podcast ministry really was allowing me to connect with more and more people. And I'm just mentioning these things to you because I hope this will kind of pique your interest into the kind of opportunities and just the interesting things that can come your way when you kind of take that step of faith and get involved in podcasting. It really allows you to reach a worldwide audience if you do it correctly. Now, these are the 3 podcasts that I mentioned to you just a moment ago. I host the Chapter a Day audio Bible, and I started that at the very end of 2015. So it's really more fair to say that the start of 2016 is when I started offering the Chapter a Day audio Bible. And what I do, if you're not familiar with that podcast, is each day I read a chapter of the Scriptures. I use multiple translations, and I just publish a new episode every day. And at the end of each episode, I have a time of prayer as we seek the Lord's intervention in our lives to help us apply what we've been learning from the Scriptures. And I just publish that every single day. And I've been publishing it every day since really the very start of 2016. And as I mentioned, that podcast in particular is presently, as I'm recording right now, at 3.5 million downloads, 3.5 million downloads. And that blows my mind. That's something that really amazes me. And it seems to be growing very quickly. It took about 2 years and 8 months to hit its first 1 million downloads. And then it took another 11 months to hit the second million. And then maybe about 7 months to hit a third million. And it's just growing quicker and quicker each month and reaching more and more people. So that's the biggest of the 3 that I'm hosting. And about 1.5 years after I started hosting the Chapter a Day audio Bible, I started my sermon podcast. And on my sermon podcast, I basically put a variety of things on there. I put my Sunday sermons from my church. I also, from time to time, put other content on there, including training that I host in my membership group and just whatever I think will be beneficial for listeners. But there's a variety of things that I place in that podcast, and it's just got a variety of content that tends to be in long form. So the Chapter a Day audio Bible, most episodes are under 10 minutes, but the sermons, Bible studies, and training podcast, most of those episodes are right around 40 or 45 minutes. And the third podcast that I just started about 9 months ago is Daily Devotions with Pastor John. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that podcast is on track to really replicate the downloads that I'm seeing with the Chapter a Day audio Bible. Most of those episodes for the Daily Devotions with Pastor John are about 4 minutes long. So it's not a long podcast, but it just offers a daily devotion and a brief time of prayer each day. And I hope that it encourages people in their walk with Christ, and I enjoy producing that content on a daily basis. Now, I thought it would be interesting to share with you some of the feedback that I get. And by the way, I tend to get this feedback almost daily and sometimes multiple times a day as the podcasts have grown. And it really encourages me. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages, but I tend to be a words of affirmation person. And so when I receive good feedback like this, it tends to encourage me. And just over the past few days, so these two, I'll share 2 messages with you that I just received over the past few days. These are fresh, but this is a pretty good sample of what I'm hearing from listeners. And this listener, his name is Daniel, and I believe he is in the UK. And Daniel said, I just started reading your book, Who is God, and felt compelled to give you my thanks. Thank you so much for the work you do. And then he goes on to say, I've always known of God's existence, thanks to my mom, but I've never taken the time to get to know God as an adult. So I started listening to your Chapter a Day audio Bible at work. Since I started, I have such a longing to know more and spend time with God. Thanks again, and God bless you. So that was very kind. I enjoyed reading that the other day as Daniel sent that. And then a listener, her name is Angela. I'm not sure where she's located, but she sent me this message the other day as well. She said, hello, I've just found your Chapter a Day podcast. I use Castbox and have had a hard time finding a biblical podcast that I enjoy. I can now listen to God's Word while at work, and be able to truly appreciate it. You said you like to hear from us, so I wanted to send you a message and let you know that what you do is so appreciated. I will be looking into your other podcasts as well. I've not been in the Word as much as I should be here lately, but this is going to help me a lot. Have a great day, and God bless. And again, that's from Angela. And so those are two examples of some of the feedback that I've been receiving pretty regularly since starting the podcasts, and it's very encouraging. It motivates me to continue producing this content when the Lord reveals to me through these listeners that people are growing in their faith and that it's helping them. And I point these things out to you to give you a couple real-world examples to encourage you that if you have a desire to create Christian content, if you have a desire to create a podcast in particular, I'd encourage you to go for it. Do it. It's valuable. It could be something that the Lord uses to be a blessing to people in ways that will surprise you. And these are people that maybe face-to-face you'll never even have the privilege to meet, but you can serve them, you can bless them, you can help them in their walk with Christ through creating good Christian content that you release through a podcast. So great examples of some of the feedback I've been receiving, and I wanted to share some of it with you because, again, it encourages me greatly. So how did I get into podcasting? It's kind of an interesting story, and I'll just tell you briefly what that sounds like for me, but I discovered podcasts during a particularly discouraging season of life. So 2015 was probably one of the hardest years in ministry that I've ever had. It was a year that was just difficult in a variety of ways. And I remember when my phone updated during the course of that year, one of the things included in the update was a podcasting app, and I decided to check it out and see if I could find some interesting podcasts. And so I looked to see what was available, and I found some podcasts that I enjoyed, and I started listening to all kinds of podcasts. Obviously, I found some good Christian podcasts. I also started listening to podcasts that included sports biographies, and I thought they were great. I started listening to some personal finance podcasts and found those extremely helpful. And what I noticed was, as I was using these podcasts, as I was listening to them, the Lord was blessing me with the privilege to just kind of take my mind off some of my problems and some of the things that were weighing my heart down in the midst of my role as a pastor. And so the podcasts provided a great distraction. And I would listen to them while I drove. I would listen to them sometimes while I was at work. I would listen to them just while I was working in the yard. It seemed like I was listening to podcasts all the time, and I was fascinated by them. I truly enjoyed them, and I thought, wow, there's more good content out here than I know what to do with. It just seemed like there was more content to consume than I could even imagine, and podcasting's been growing and growing ever since. But one of the great benefits that I experienced during that season was I noticed that the podcasts I was listening to actually helped me fall asleep at night because I was feeling anxious and because I was feeling a bit discouraged. I was having trouble sleeping. And I would put on some of the biographical podcasts in particular, and I would hear the life stories of other people, and it would help me get my mind off of my own problems, and it would help me to fall asleep. And I basically just became a consumer of podcasts at that point, and I thought they were fascinating, and I thought they were helpful, and I thought they were encouraging. And then that started motivating me to consider creating podcast content. So because I found them so helpful and because they had become a regular part of my daily schedule, I actually started to wonder if I had anything that I could contribute that might help others. And I actually started with a podcast on leadership. It was just focused on the nature of leadership, what leadership was like. I produced about 20 episodes of that and then started to lose motivation. It's an interesting topic, but I wasn't sure that I was remaining motivated to do a weekly show on that subject. And then I transitioned to creating the Chapter a Day audio Bible because that was my habit. That's what I would tend to do each day. I would read a chapter a day in the Scriptures and just do that for my own personal devotional time. And I thought, let me record a podcast with a daily reading from Scripture. I actually hoped that my children would utilize it. I have 4 children, and and I thought, this is the type of thing they could listen to during the course of the day. I thought maybe it would help them if they heard the scriptures being read in their Father's voice. And so I started recording those, but I did it in podcast form with the thought that maybe if I created this content, put it out there as a podcast, that it would help my children, that it would also help others. And when I started getting feedback that it was genuinely helping others, I stayed motivated to keep recording and editing on a daily basis. And when we get into editing, you'll see that sometimes the more complicated part of creating a podcast isn't necessarily recording it, it's editing it. And I'll show you how I do that and some tips and tricks that I think will make that a lot easier for you. But, in the context of the Chapter a Day audio Bible, I was basically committing myself to record the entire Bible. I don't know if you've ever seen, but it tends to be a pretty big book. It's a large book, might be the largest book in most people's libraries. And I thought, all right, am I going to do this? Am I going to record the entire thing? But I stayed motivated to record it because I realized it was genuinely helping others. And I produced the Bible on audio just through daily episodes that I was releasing each and every day, and continue to stay faithful to do that. And so I bring that up to you because I think it's important for you to identify a source of motivation that will help you stay motivated to keep working at this. And I say this because one of the reasons people don't succeed with their podcast is they give up too soon. So you can see on the slide there, I mentioned that even during the early seasons when you're still building an audience and still building momentum, it's important to stay motivated. Don't give up too soon. The Chapter a Day audio Bible, it didn't take off on day one or month one, or really even like within 6 months. I mean, it was still growing. It was still building momentum. It was launched. It was growing. I was grateful to see what I was seeing, but it started to hit its real momentum a little bit later on. And so during that early season, when you're building an audience, when you're building momentum, come back to your source of motivation so that you continue to stick with it. Don't give up too soon, because it usually takes a little while to build that audience, to build that momentum. Now, I'm going to show you some shortcuts that'll help you get that started in a good way during the course of your first 28 days of doing this, and it'll help you lay a foundation that will genuinely help launch you quicker, I think, than I necessarily was able to launch, because I was trying to figure this out on the fly. But I do want you to stay with it, and that's why I'm asking you right at the outset here, what is your motivation? So figure out what your motivation is. And for me, one of the sources of motivation for me was the knowledge that what I was producing was helping people grow in their walk with Christ, and that kept me motivated to continue. Now, another important question for you to ask right at the outset here is, what is your vision for your show? So think about that for just a second. What's your vision for your show? So as I've mentioned a few times already, I have a passion for helping people come to know Jesus deeply through gaining a better understanding of Scripture. That's what I'm motivated to do. It's motivated me to serve the Lord in pastoral ministry, and I consider my podcasts, my books, my blog, all of these things an extension of that ministry. So my passion is to help people come to know Jesus. And one of the best ways that I have found to help people come to know Jesus is through helping them understand the Scriptures, because the Scriptures are pointing people to Christ. And so you'll see that theme in the podcasts that I host. So that's the vision that I have for my show. So what's the vision you have for your show? And maybe some of the ways that we can help you discern that would be through just asking a couple related questions. So the first question, and I have this here on the screen, what has the Lord taught you that you could convey to others? What's something that He's taught you that you could be teaching, that you could convey, that you could communicate? And maybe a good way to even try and discern that would be, what's the type of thing people ask you about with regularity? So think about that for just a second. And a related thing, what do you have a burning desire to communicate? What do you really want people to know? What's the type of thing that you talk about even when no one's really asking you to talk about it? What do you have a burning desire to communicate? How can you inspire someone else with the knowledge that you've been blessed with? So be thinking about that, because I think that'll help you develop a vision for your show. Now, let me say this right now as you're thinking about starting a show. You can do this. I have met so many people through the years who desire to host a show, but it seems like they always talk themselves out of taking the steps that they need to take to create one. And they either doubt their ability to do this, they doubt whether or not people would actually listen to their show. But I'm telling you, as somebody who has several years of experience in hosting podcasts, in starting several podcasts, and helping other people get their show off the ground, you can do this. You don't have to be a celebrity to have a successful podcast. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think I listen to any podcasts that are really hosted by celebrities. Maybe a few people you could say, well, that person's kind of a celebrity or a micro celebrity. But the truth is you do not have to be a celebrity to have a successful podcast. Average, everyday people with something to say host podcasts all the time, and I think it's such a blessing to be able to listen to the podcasts that are being shared by people who aren't celebrities. They do fantastic work. They share helpful content. And so if you create something that's helpful, not just a vanity project, you will eventually find your audience. Your goal with your show should be to be helpful. Be helpful. Help people in some way. Like I said, I'm trying to help people learn the scriptures and come to know Jesus in a deeper way. And if you take the knowledge that you've been blessed with and you figure out a way to be helpful to people and not just create a podcast for the sake of your own vanity, because you'll lose motivation and people aren't going to listen to something that's just about your own vanity. But if you create something that's genuinely helpful, people are going to listen. You will eventually find your audience if you stick with it. And you can see number 4 here on the slide in front of us. I have just a statement that I want you to keep in mind. Value is greater than vanity. Value is greater than vanity. So you want to create something of value. You want to communicate value. You want to help people learn valuable things. Value is greater than vanity. So you're not just creating a show as a vanity project. You want to convey value. You want to create something that's helpful, and you can do it. You don't need to wait around for somebody else to do this. You don't need to have just celebrity status or think the world of yourself. You just need to be a regular person who can create something that's helpful and have a willingness to communicate it, because value is greater than vanity. You absolutely can do this. So let's get started doing this. And let me tell you what we're going to do. In the coming sessions, I'm going to show you everything I currently know about creating a show, about growing an audience, because that's going to be the next question you're going to have after you create the show. How do you actually find listeners? So we're going to talk about creating the show, growing an audience, and I also want to include some discussion about what it looks like to ethically monetize what you're building. Because this can become, for some of you, this might actually become part of your profession, or maybe a vocational ministry, or something that supplements your income in a very helpful way that's a blessing to your family. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you do so ethically. So we're going to talk about ethical ways that you can monetize a podcast. And again, you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to spend a fortune. Believe me, you don't need to spend that much at all. All you need is to develop a vision that you're willing to see through with action. So don't just be a talker. Don't just be a dreamer. Be a doer, somebody who follows through with action. And I'm going to give you action steps. I'm going to show you how to do this one step at a time. And if you follow the system that I'm going to outline for you here, you'll be able to get this launched and started and done in less than 28 days. I selected 28 days because I think that 4 weeks is an adequate time for anybody to get a show off the ground. But I think you could do it in much less time than that if you just stick with it. See it through with action. And again, keep in mind, there are people that you personally are uniquely qualified to help. And so my goal in this course is to help you help them. There are people who will listen to what you have to say because of your personality type, your experience, the way you communicate. There is an audience of people who will trust what you say. They will trust you. They will want to hear what you have to say. You are uniquely qualified to help a certain segment of people, and I want to help you help them. And at this point, I have to tell you, I could not imagine not hosting podcasts. This is something that's become such a part of my day-to-day life. For years now, I've been recording daily podcasts, so I could not imagine what it would be like to not host podcasts at this point. I would miss it so much. I actually feel like it's become the most expansive part of my ministry, so I'm really grateful for the privilege to do it because, again, on a daily basis, I have the privilege to connect with people all throughout the world, and it is truly edifying to me to know that something that I could record in my home with a microphone, with a computer, is something that the Lord could use to bless somebody in a far-off place that I may never personally visit, but they're blessed by something that I'm recording here in my home. And again, I believe that this has become the most expansive part of my ministry, and I want to help you develop a ministry that is just the same, because I think that you'll be edified in doing it, and I think God will be glorified if you do it the right way, with the right motivations. So if you're ready to join me on this ministry journey, I'm just going to say, let's go. Let's get started on it, because it's something that I think you'll truly enjoy if this is something you're called to do. Now, let me give you a quick preview before we finish up of what our next lesson is going to include. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about a variety of things, but we're going to talk about developing your show concept, and then we're going to talk about identifying your target audience. Those two concepts are linked. They're very much related to one another. We're also going to talk about selecting your format. As I mentioned, related to my podcasts, I have different formats that the 3 podcasts follow. So I'm going to suggest some options for you and encourage you to select your format and then plan your episode structure. And then we're also going to talk about creating a content calendar. That's extremely helpful so you don't run out of ideas along the way. And then we're going to help you decide on the length and frequency of your episodes. So keep that in mind. Our next lesson is going to focus on each of these things. And I'll mention this, developing this plan at the outset will make the process of creating your show much easier and much less intimidating. And I think it'll help you find that spot where you feel like you're really starting to hit momentum much earlier and much sooner than I felt like I hit momentum when I was just doing this trial and error years ago. So I hope that's helpful to you. Glad to have you on board, and I'm looking forward to working with you all throughout this course as we help you get your Christian podcast up and running. I'll catch you in the next lesson.